One of the biggest hurdles that beginners face when learning guitar is learning strumming patterns. And then once a beginner has learned 1 or 2 or 3 strumming patterns, it's really hard to break free of just playing those few patterns over and over again. In this masterclass, I'm going to really break down what a strumming pattern is, how they're constructed, how they work with rhythm and chord progressions and songs, and how you can actually create your own. This information will be the foundation for almost everything you do on the guitar and will allow you to play more advanced rhythms much quicker than most guitarists can. The first thing you need to understand are quarter notes. In most Western music, the quarter note is the pulse of the song and what you tap your foot to. The most common time signature in Western music is 4/4, which is also known as common time. And that means that there's 4 beats per bar and the quarter note gets the beat. So if we just look at a simple piece of notation, if you look here, that 4/4 represents the time signature. That can be a different time signature, but like I said, the majority of Western music is in 4/4, which is why it's called common time. And like I said, the top number represents that there are 4 beats per bar, and the bottom number represents what note gets the beat. And in 4/4 time, the quarter note gets the beat, so that's what the 4 represents on the bottom. And then what I have drawn out here are just all quarter notes. So that would mean that there's 4 quarter notes per bar because there's 4 beats per bar and the quarter note gets the beat. This could be other note values, or it could be smaller note values, or it could be bigger note values, and then that would change how many notes are in each bar, but it would still equal the same amount of time as 4 quarter notes equal. I'm just showing a really simple representation for now, and I'll explain why I'm even showing this as we go forward and how this relates to strumming. So you can see I have 4 quarter notes together, and they're together in what's called a bar. So what's outlined there is a bar, here's another bar, here's another bar, here's another bar, and bars are also called measures. And I've just chosen a random number of 4 bars. I could show you 100 bars, I could show you 10 bars, it doesn't matter. This is just to show you a representation of how quarter notes work in music. And the reason I have 4 bars is because coming up, I'm going to show you a chord progression that actually lasts 4 bars and how to strum patterns with it. So that's why I'm showing 4 bars. There's nothing special about 4 bars. And these vertical lines are what are called the bar lines. So that separates each bar from one another. So you can see a group of 4 quarter notes, then a bar line, a group of 4 quarter notes, a bar line, and so on. But we're going to keep it really simple. This is what it's going to look like when we're talking about strumming patterns. So each of these boxes is representing a bar, and the 4/4 obviously is the same. That's representing 4/4 time, common time. But this whole course is going to be in 4/4 time. So even if it doesn't show a 4/4, you'll know that you're still in 4/4 in this course because that's all I'm talking about for now. So we're going to start off and we're just going to take a basic E minor chord because it's a fairly simple chord to hold. And we're going to use this to start learning strumming patterns. So now I've written E minor at the top of the first bar, and that means we're going to play E minor through all the bars when we actually play multiple bars. But if we were going to play this E minor for quarter notes, we would strum down 4 times, and each of those strums would represent a quarter note. And then if we wanted to repeat that for 4 bars, we would strum down 4 times per bar, which would give us a total of 16 strums. And the important thing to understand is that you need to keep the quarter notes evenly spaced. And I'm going to talk more about this and actually explain how you do it and how to do it with a metronome or a backing track. But for now, just realize that each of those strums is evenly spaced within the bar and they're evenly spaced in between bars. So once I get to the 4th strum of the first bar, the spacing between the 4th strum of the first bar and the 1st strum of the second bar is the same spacing as all the other strums. And it's important to understand that 4/4 time or strumming quarter notes doesn't have anything to do with tempo. I could strum this really slowly at a slow tempo. Or I could strum it really fast at a fast tempo. but I'd still be strumming 4 quarter notes in 4/4 time, so that means there's 4 strums per bar. It's just how quickly we go through the bars is determined by the tempo. But even when we speed up, the spacing between each of the strums needs to stay the same with each other. So these are the foundation for everything you're going to do when you're strumming is quarter notes. You need to always understand where your quarter notes are when you're strumming. And in 4/4 time, it's so important because that's the pulse of the song. That's where you're tapping your foot. That's how you keep good time, and that's how you always know where you are within a bar, within a piece of music, when playing with other musicians, when playing with the backing track. That quarter note tells you where you are and helps you keep your time. And then we build from there, but everything is still based on understanding where those quarter notes are. So it's also important to count when you're playing, or at least count in your head to know where you are at all times. And counting quarter notes is really easy because it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. So when you strum down, you count 1. When you strum down the next time, you count 2. Next time 3. Next time 4. And then you would just repeat that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on through all of however many bars there are. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the next important thing to understand and to start practicing early on is tapping your foot along with these strums. So every time you strum down on a quarter note, you should be tapping your foot. So as your hand goes down and strums through the strings, your foot goes down and taps the floor. This will really help you keep your time, and especially help you keep time and know where you are at all times when you're playing more complicated strumming patterns. So your hand goes down, your foot goes down, your hand comes up, your foot comes up. So once you get it down, it's really easy to tap just quarter notes. It gets more complicated when you start adding in other note values. But like I said, start practicing it now because it'll help so much as you get into other types of strutting patterns that are more advanced. And another thing to be aware of is that you want to keep your hand moving smoothly the whole time. You don't strum down, rush your hand up, strum down, pause, rush your hand up, or anything like that. Keep it moving smoothly down, smoothly up, all trying to keep everything evenly paced. So now we're going to take 4 bars of music, and instead of just playing E minor the whole time, we're actually going to play a chord progression. And the chord progression we're going to play is G, D, E minor 7, C add 9. Which is a really common chord progression. So for the first bar, we're playing a G chord. For the second bar, we're playing a D chord. For the third bar, we're playing an E minor 7 chord. And for the fourth bar, we're playing a C add 9 chord. So something that I want you to be aware of when I'm playing the chord progression, and it's a good way for you to play it as well. Each time I play the chord progression, I'm going to play it one time through, which is 4 bars, but I'm always going to end back on the G chord, which would be the first bar starting over. So that's so the chord progression sounds resolved. If I don't do that, it would just sound up in the air. Also, that's where you would start over if you wanted to repeat these bars over and over again, because you can play these one time through 4 bars of it, but then you can just keep repeating by starting back over on the G chord, and then, like I said, just repeating over and over as many times as you want. And then when you're ready to end, just hit the G chord one more time to end. And you'll see me doing that each time I play the chord progression. I'll play it one time through and I'll end on the G. But if I wanted to keep playing, I could just keep playing that G the same way that I played it the first time, and then just keep going through until I wanted to end. And then I would just strum the G one time to end. So that's just something to be aware of as you're going through this and as you're practicing yourself. And like I said, this is a really popular chord progression, which is why I chose this chord progression. And I chose these specific chords with these specific voicings because they sound good together, but they're also easier to play if you can play chord progressions, if you can play chords already. Obviously, if you've never played chord progressions, if you still struggle with chord transitions, this is going to be difficult. But once you get it down, you'll find that it's a fairly easy progression to play with fairly easy transitions. And this isn't a lesson about chord progressions or making transitions or any of that, but I'm quickly going to show you how so you can make the transitions in the easiest way in case you need to practice that. So all of these chords share the note that's on the second string, third fret under your third finger. So you're going to leave that finger down the whole time and just move your other fingers. So after you play the G chord, leave your third finger down and remove your first, second, and fourth fingers and place your first and second fingers where they go for the D chord. Then again, when transitioning to the E minor 7 chord, leave your third finger down and move your first and second fingers where they go for the E minor 7 chord. Then again, same thing when transitioning to the C add 9, leave your third finger down, move your first and second fingers where they go for the C add 9. Then for the last transition from C add 9 to G, it's really easy because they're really similar shapes. So you leave your third finger down still, move your first and second finger up towards the ceiling to the 5th and 6th strings within the same frets, and place your fourth finger back down where it goes on the first string. So now we'll just take these 4 bars of music with this chord progression. Like I said, it's G major for the first bar, D major for the second, E minor for the third, and C add 9 for the fourth. And we're still just going to play quarter notes. So that means we're going to play 4 strums per chord, which is 4 strums per bar still. And we're just going to strum all down strums because we're always strumming down strums on the quarter note. And just be aware when you count this, it's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 over the G, 1, 2, 3, 4 over the D, and so on. And every time you strum, every time your hand goes down, your foot goes down and taps. Every time your hand comes up, your foot comes up. So the next big step, which is a really big step, is learning how to actually play in time. Everything we've done so far, we're kind of playing in time because we're trying to keep everything evenly spaced. But to really play in time, to really practice it, you need to practice with the metronome or with the backing track. And so I'm going to explain how to do that starting with the metronome, and then I'm going to teach you how to do it with the backing track. So like I said, the first step is understanding how to do this with a metronome. And a metronome is just a device, if you don't know, that just keeps constant time. You can choose how fast it goes based on what are called beats per minute. So it's just like in time, there's 60 seconds per minute. If you're playing at 60 beats per minute, that means there's 60, if you're playing strums, 60 strums per minute. And then you can go slower, you can go a lot faster than that. But we're going to keep everything at a fairly slow tempo for now, around 60 beats per minute. So there's countless types of metronomes you can use. There's countless apps you can use on your phone or on your desktop, or you can buy actual analog metronomes. It doesn't matter. You just need a basic metronome that's going to keep basic time, and you can change the tempo, which, like I said, are the beats per minute. So if we were to look at this chord progression, still looking at quarter notes, I'm going to let it play through with a metronome set at 60 beats per minute. And every time the metronome clicks, you're going to see one of the strums highlighted, starting with the first strum, all the way through the whole chord progression. So you can see that when the metronome clicks, that's when you would strum down. That's when you would count your 1, 2, 3, or 4. So here we go. Here's a metronome set at 60 beats per minute. So now I'm going to actually play along with that. So along with that metronome clicking, I'm going to actually strum along to it. Here's an example of that. And then if I want to speed it up just to show you, I can speed it up. I'll speed it up to 90 beats per minute and play along with it just so you can see everything's still evenly spaced. The metronome is still clicking on the quarter notes, the 1, 2, 3, 4, which are the down strums, which is where I tap my foot. It's just now I'm playing through faster because the tempo is faster. So playing with the metronome is good. It's really good to practice, but it's also important to be able to practice with something that's more musical, because when you're playing with other musicians or in real life situations, you're not just playing to a click, you're playing to a drum beat usually. So I've created a basic beat jam track, which is just a really simple rock beat. So not only does this give you more of a real world feel for playing, it's also more fun to play along with than just a metronome. So first, I'm going to play the backing track just so you can hear it just for a little bit, and then I'm going to break down what's actually going on. So if we were to look at this chord progression with the 4 strums per chord, which is 4 strums per bar, which are all quarter notes, with the actual backing track, if you listen, the kicks are on the 1 and the 3 of each bar. And the kick, if you don't know, if you look at a drum set, that's actually called the kick because the foot is tapping a pedal that's hitting the bass drum, and that's called the kick drum. And it's a low thud. And if you listen to the backing track, you should be able to hear where those kicks are happening. And they're on the 1 and 3. And the snare drum, which is what you hit with your stick and is the loud crack sound, those happen on the 2s and 4s. And that's really important to understand. The 2s and 4s are what are called the backbeat. And the backbeat is really strong in most popular music. And that's what you would clap your hands to if you were listening to music. If you're at a concert and clapping along with the band, you would clap on the 2 and the 4. So now I'm going to play the backing track again with this chord progression on the screen at 60 beats per minute, and you're going to see the strums highlighted again, the quarter note strums. So really listen where that kick hits and that snare hits. There's also a hi-hat in this backing track, which is but you don't really have to worry about that. You can kind of just let that fade in the background for now. I really want you to listen to the kick and the snare because those land on the quarter notes, and especially the snare, the louder crack sound, because that lands on the 2 and the 4, which is the backbeat. So now I'm going to demo this and play along with the backing track so you can hear it with the chord progression and hear where the strums actually land within that backing track. I'm going to play it at 60 beats per minute, and then I'm going to play it faster at 90 beats per minute just so you can hear it at different tempos. It's really important just to be able to play those strums in time, whether you're playing with the metronome or the backing track, and always knowing where those strums happen. And again, you're strumming and counting and tapping your foot, which all land on the quarter notes. And when you're playing with the backing track, the first strum happens on the kick, but you're strumming down, you're tapping, you're counting 1, that happens on a kick. The second down strum, the next quarter note, happens on the snare. the third happens on the kick, and so on. Just repeated over and over. And drum beats can get way more complicated than this and kind of shift things around and play different parts on different parts of the kick or leave different parts out, play more complicated rhythms, and it gets a lot harder to play along with unless you're used to it. But this, like I said, is a basic rock beat that is really important to start with, and lots of songs just have this basic rock beat as the foundation of the song, and getting it down with this will allow you to get into more complicated rhythms with more complicated beats going. So now that you've gotten quarter notes down, the next big step is learning how to strum eighth notes. So I told you there are 4 quarter note strums per bar. You can probably guess by the name of it that there are 8 eighth note strums per bar. And all we do is add an up strum in between each one of the quarter note down strums. So those quarter notes stay in the exact same place. It's just now, as our hand is naturally coming up before it goes back down for the next quarter note strum, we're going to add an up strum in between. So if I demo that to an E minor just for 1 bar, here's an example of playing eighth notes. And it's important to understand where those quarter note strums are. Those down strums are still your quarter note. But really, when you're playing all down and up strums, like I just demonstrated, they're actually all eighth notes. But it's still important to understand that each one of those down strums is where the quarter note lands. And that's important to understand because it's the beat. It's where you tap your foot. It's the pulse of the song. So again, that was for 1 bar. Now we can just do it for as many bars as we want. Here's an example through 4 bars. And so it's important to understand that when you play eighth notes, that has nothing to do with your tempo. Those quarter note down strums are still in the same place no matter what. It's just you're adding that up strum in between each one of the down strums. And it's important, again, that each one of your strums is evenly spaced. And the important thing to understand now is that your metronome is not clicking on each one of these strums. It's still only clicking on the quarter note down strums because, again, that's the pulse of your song. That's where the beat lands. So that metronome is going to click on all those quarter note strums. So you'll strum down with the click of the metronome, but then you strum up in between the next click and then down on the next click. Strum up without a click, down on the next click, and so on. So I'm just going to play the metronome through at 60 beats per minute just so you can see it with these strums highlighted so you can see where the metronome is actually clicking. So you could see it was only clicking on the quarter note down strums, which is where you would tap your foot. And then if you're playing to the backing track, the kick would still be on the first down strum, the snare would be on the second down strum, the kick would be on the third down strum, the snare would be on the fourth down strum, and so on. You wouldn't have the kick or the snare falling on those up strums. And really, it's the hi-hat in this backing track that's falling on each one of those eighth notes, which is the... So you can listen to the hi-hat in this situation and see that that's landing on each one of these strums. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play this along to the backing track. I'm going to do it at 60 beats per minute. Then I'm going to do it at 90 beats per minute so you can hear it at different tempos. Now, the next important thing to understand, again, is how to count this. And those quarter notes that we counted before, the 1, 2, 3, 4, stay in the exact same place. They stay on your quarter note down strums, so that'll never change. The thing that is changing is now that you have an up strum in between each one of those quarter note down strums, and you need to count those as well if you're playing them. And you count quarter notes 1, 2, 3, 4. When you count eighth notes, you count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and just keep repeating that. So all of those up strums you'll count and. All the down strums will still just be a number, 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4, depending where you are in the bar. And then you would just repeat that depending on how many bars you have. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and for as many bars as you have. So I'm going to play this again to the backing track, but this time I'm going to count along. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So here are some things that I just want to point out now that you need to be aware of. Even though we've added in an extra strum, the ands in between the 1, 2, 3, and 4 when we're playing these eighth notes, your hand is really doing the same motion because when you're strumming just quarter notes, your hand goes down, but then it needs to come back up before it goes down again for the next down strum. So your hand is still doing the exact same motion. It's just now on the way up, you actually hit some strings on the way up. But whether you're playing just quarter note down strums or whether you're playing all eighth notes with down and up strums, your hand should basically look the same. Moving smoothly, everything evenly spaced, your hand goes down, your hand comes up. And your foot is doing the exact same thing as your hand is doing. So your foot goes down on the quarter note down strums and hits the floor to tap, and then it comes up on the up strum. So your hand and foot are directly tied together. It's just like your hand is holding a string, and when your hand goes down, your foot goes down. When your hand comes up, your foot comes up. You only hear a tap on the 1, 2, 3, 4 quarter notes, the down strums. So now we can take these 4 bars and instead of just playing with the E minor, we can play it with the chord progression. So again, everything stays the exact same. It's just now we've added that up strum in between each one of the down strums. And now we're playing 8 strums per chord, which is 8 strums per bar, instead of just 4. And everything you do, just keep your hand moving smoothly. It's not very common for a strumming pattern just to be all down strums or to be all down and up strums. What's most common is to mix it up. And so you're going to mix up quarter notes and eighth notes instead of just playing all quarter notes or just playing all eighth notes. And this may sound complicated, but it's actually not. It's a really simple way to do this. It takes time to practice it and get good at it and get all the mechanics down. But the actual concept behind how to do this is really simple. So when we started, we had just all down strums, which were all just on the quarter note. Then we had eighth note strumming, which was all down and up strums. So we had 8 strums per bar instead of 4 strums per bar. Well, now to mix up quarter notes and eighth notes so that we're not just playing all quarter notes or just playing all eighth notes, we're going to remove at least one of the up strums, and then we'll end up with a mix of quarter notes and eighth notes. So for example, I could remove this first up strum and I end up with this. So in that last example, I removed the first up strum. I could now just remove the second up strum, and I end up with this strumming pattern. Or instead of removing the first or the second one, I could remove the third up strum, and I end up with this strumming pattern. Or I could remove the last up strum, and I end up with this pattern. And removing one up strum does make a difference. It does make the pattern more interesting, but it gets even more interesting when you start removing more than one up strum. So those last examples just removed one of the up strums at a time. I started with removing the first up strum, then I removed the second, then the third, then the fourth, but I left all the other up strums in there. If you remove a combination of 2 up strums, now it starts sounding more interesting. So I could start by removing the first 2 up strums. I end up with this pattern. And then we could just go through all the combinations of removing 2 up strums at a time. So the first time I removed the first 2 up strums, now I can remove the first and the third, and I end up with this pattern. Or I could remove the first and the fourth, and I end up with this pattern. So now we've removed all the combinations that have the first up strum removed. We removed the first and the second, the first, the third, the first, and the fourth. Now we can remove all the combinations that have the second up strum removed, besides the one that has the first and the second, because we already did that. So if I remove the second and the third, I end up with this pattern. If I remove the second and the fourth, I end up with this pattern. And so those are all the combinations removing the second up strum. So now the last combination we have is removing the third and the fourth up strum. So if we remove those, we end up with this pattern. So now we've gone through all the combinations of removing 2 of the up strums. Now we can remove combinations of 3 of the up strums. And 3 is the most you can remove because there's only 4 up strums within a bar in 4/4 time. So if you remove 4, you're just back to all down strums again, which would just be what we started with. So removing 3 up strums, if I remove the first 3, I end up with this pattern. If I remove the first, the second, and the fourth, I end up with this pattern. And then we're down to the last combination that we can have, which is removing the second, the third, and the fourth up strum, and we come up with this. So now we can take any of those strumming patterns and plug them into bars of music. So we can take the 4 bars that we've been using and start with the E minor and just take any of those patterns that we went over. Here's one where we're just leaving the third up strum in, and we can play that for 4 bars of music, and it would sound like this. So now all of a sudden, these strumming patterns are starting to sound more musical. They're starting to sound like patterns you would actually hear in a song. Now it's important to understand how to count these strumming patterns when it's not just all quarter notes or it's not just all eighth notes. The first thing to understand is that you're always going to count your quarter notes. Those are so important to know where they are, your quarter note down strums, because that's the pulse of the music. In 4/4 time, that's where the beat is landing. That's where you tap your foot. But when you're playing a combination of quarter notes and eighth notes, you only count the eighth notes that you actually strum. So in this case, you would only count the third up strum. And so instead of counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the whole time, in this situation, you would count 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. Here's a demonstration of playing this and counting along with the backing track. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 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 Now, what's also important to understand is that your foot is still just tapping on the 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's always where it's going to tap. You're not going to tap on any of the other strums. And again, it's always important to understand that your hand is always moving down and up the same way whether you're strumming or not. It's just the only difference is that you're hitting strings when there's an actual strum there, but your hand should basically look the same, always going in a down and up motion, and your foot should always be going right along with your hand. So now we can just take the E minor chord for 4 bars and go through some other strumming pattern examples, just to make sure you really have a solid understanding of this. So here's another example, but this time we're taking the pattern that's only playing the first and the fourth up strum. And again, when you count this, you're always counting the 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's so important to know where those land because that's your pulse, that's the beat. But you only count the up strums that you actually play. So in this example, you count the first and fourth up strum. So it would be 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, 3, 4, and so on. And again, your foot is just tapping right along with your hand. So as your hand goes down, your foot taps. As your hand comes up, your foot comes up. And your hand should look the same as it has been. It's just where it hits the strings on the way up changes. But the motion of your hand should stay the same, just evenly and smoothly down and up the whole time. So here's an example of this to the backing track. This time I'm not going to count along. I'm just going to play to the backing track at 60 beats per minute, and you can try to count along while I'm playing. here's another example. This time it's the example where we leave in the second and fourth up strum and remove the first and the third. And again, if we were going to count this, we count the 1, 2, 3, and 4 always, and then we're only counting the up strums that we play. So this would be 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and so on. And here's an example of this to the backing track. Again, I'm not going to count out loud. You can try to count along while I'm playing. And here's one final example, just taking what we came up with at the beginning of this section. And this time it's leaving in the second and the third up strum, removing the first and the fourth, and just repeating that for 4 bars over E minor. And again, when you count, you always count the 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you only count the up strums that you play. So you would count 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. And again, here's an example to the backing track. So now we can just take those examples and play them to the chord progression. So here's the first example again, the first strumming pattern example that we used over the E minor chord, but now we're just going to play it over the G, D, E minor 7, C add 9. So again, it's just one strumming pattern per chord, and then you repeat over and over. This again was the strumming pattern that leaves in the third up strum and removes the rest of the up strums. And again, you only count the 1, 2, 3, 4, and the one up strum that you play, which is the and of 3. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this time you have more to think about because you're actually transitioning chords after every bar. So after every one time you play the pattern through, you have to transition a chord, play the pattern through again, transition as you go through the 4 bars. So here's an example of this with the backing track. Or here's the second example we looked at over E minor, again just to the chord progression. And here's an example of what this sounds like to the backing track. Here's the third example we looked at over the E minor. Now we're applying it to the chord progression. Here's an example of that. And here is the last example we looked at over the E minor chord. Now we're just applying it to the chord progression. Here's an example of that. And here's a tip that will really help you out if you don't know this. If you have a strumming pattern like the one on the screen that has that last up strum, meaning the and of 4. So for example, over the G chord, we have 1 and 2, 3, 4, and. that last and is an up strum right before you have to transition from G to D on the down strum on D. Well, that is a quick transition to make if you try to hold the G the whole time through that last up strum and then quickly transition to D on the first down strum of D. It's much easier and actually sounds better to make the transition during that last up strum. You may have noticed that that's what I was doing when I was giving examples. I make my transitions during that last up strum if that last up strum is there. If it's not there, I just make it in that same time, but you're not actually strumming. So if you don't have the and a 4 there, you can easily make it without worrying about it. But if that and a 4 is there, if that last up strum is there, start your transition during that last up strum and hit whatever notes are shared between the chords, or just hit open strings if none of the notes are shared, and it allows you to make those transitions smoothly. Don't try to hold the chord through that last up strum and then quickly change in that split second you have to get to that next down strum. It'll sound choppy, it won't have a good flow, and it won't sound right. It sounds much better just to let open strings ring out during that last up strum while you're transitioning. So now we're to the point that is a really big step in learning or creating your own strumming patterns. And in the last section, we skip strums, but we only skip the up strums. For this last part of this lesson, we're actually going to skip down strums as well. We're going to skip at least one down strum, or a combination of a down strum and up strums, or multiple down strums and multiple up strums, or whatever. The only thing that's different with this one is that we always have to at least skip one down strum. And this may sound like it's super easy, but it's actually not. It makes it a lot harder to play these patterns, but it also makes them a lot more interesting and is a huge step for getting into playing more complicated patterns. So here were all the combinations we could have when we skip just an up strum, but you're actually fairly limited in the combinations that you can come up with. There's a total of 14 combinations that you can come up with. When we get into skipping down strums as well, there's a ton of combinations, and I'm not going to go through all of them because there's so many combinations you can come up with. I'll let you come up with them on your own. I'm going to show you how to do it, and I'm going to show you multiple examples that are really popular strumming patterns, but then I'm going to show you how you can take it and actually come up with your own strumming patterns using the method that I'm about to show you. And the thing to be aware of, if you're crossing out more than 2 strums in a row, you're not just playing quarter notes and eighth notes anymore, you're playing some longer note values, but don't worry about that for now. We'll get into that in other lessons. Just be aware though that it's no longer just a mix of quarter notes and eighth notes. You could be mixing, for example, a half note in there or whatever, just depending on how many strums you've crossed out in a row. But again, don't worry about that for now. That's a little more advanced than you need to know for this lesson. So like I was saying, in this part of creating strumming patterns or understanding them, is that you can remove any of the strums, but you have to remove at least one down strum. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with the combination that we had in the last section where it was just removing up strums. And you can remove the first down strum, but for now, leave it in because it's much easier to play these and keep your time and keep your place in a piece of music when you have that first down strum in there, which is the one of each bar. So for now, just always leave that first down strum. So that means we can remove any of the strums except the first down strum. But we also have to always remove at least one of the other down strums. So we could do that with any. We could take the first up strum and the second down strum and end up with this pattern. We could take just the second down strum. We could take the second, third, and fourth down strums, leave everything else. We could just take the second down strum. It doesn't matter. We can take any of the strums out except the first one just to keep it simpler. And because it's more common to leave the first one in there, we can take any of the up strums out and we can take any of the down strums except the first one. It's just we always have to take out at least one down strum. So that could be just taking out one down strum, or it could be taking out all the down strums except the first one, or it could be taking out one down strum, one up strum, two down strums, one up strum, one down strum, all the rest of the up strums. It doesn't matter, just as long as you're removing one of the down strums besides the first down strum. And you're going to come up with all these cool strumming patterns. And like I said, there's tons of combinations that you can get when you do this. So I'm not going to list them all out. I don't even know how many there are. I'd have to figure that out. Unlike when you're just removing an upstrum, there's a fairly limited amount. So what I'm going to do now is show you some of the most popular combinations, which are just ones that have been used many times in many songs over the years because they sound so good. It doesn't mean those are the only good ones. It doesn't mean that's what you should only learn. You should try different ones and come up with different ones. It just means that they're really common because they sound good. They've been used in lots of songs. So I'm going to start there just so I can have a starting point and give you ones that you might want to start with when you start doing this, because you'll be able to use those patterns in tons of songs. And another thing to be aware of, which actually makes this more difficult when you're removing one of the downstrums, is that you always tap your foot where the quarter notes are, where those downstrums would be, even if they're not there. So for example, in this example here, that third downstrum is gone, but you would still tap your foot there. And your hand would still move down like you're strumming there, but you're not going to hit any strings. So that actually makes it a lot harder to keep time. But once you get it down, it starts to feel fairly natural. And if you're just removing one downstrum, it's not too bad, and you have the rest to keep your time. But if you're removing multiple downstrums or multiple combinations of strums, it can be really tricky to know where that quarter note's going to hit. So it's really important to practice this with a metronome and a backing track so that you make sure that your foot's always tapping where those quarter notes are, because the quarter note is always there even if you're not strumming, because the quarter note in 4/4 time is the pulse of the song. It's where the beat is, and so you should always tap where the quarter notes are even if you're not strumming down in that spot. So for example, if I played this through with the metronome just at 60 beats per minute, you'll hear that the metronome's clicking on the downstrums, but it's also clicking in the one downstrum that's missing. And so your foot would still tap where that missed downstrum is, where that skipped downstrum is. And your hand would still move down like you're strumming. It's just you're not going to strum the strings. You're going to skip the strings. But your hand still moves the same no matter when you're strumming strings or not. Your hand is still just moving down and up smoothly and evenly. So here's the metronome playing while these strums are highlighted, so you can hear that the metronome's clicking on the quarter notes where the downstrums are, even if you're not playing a downstrum. And then if we put that into 4 bars of music, I'll just take that same strumming pattern that we just did and repeat it. It would sound like this. Again, I'll play it along with the metronome. So now when you count this, it's really important to understand that you're still going to count all the quarter notes even if you're not strumming them. So unlike the eighth notes, you'd only count the ones that you strum. You always count the quarter notes because you always need to know where those are, because that's the pulse. And what you can do is count it quieter or just count it in your head, but you always need to count it. So for example, with this one, we've left out the third downstrum, but I would still count that 3. I would still count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And it's just I might count the 3 softer, or I might just count it in my head, but I need to know where that 3 is because that's part of the pulse. That's one of the beats in this rhythm because we're in 4/4 time. And again, you start by counting out loud just so you get good at it, but eventually you just count in your head, and then eventually you just feel it and you know where you are all the time. And again, that 3 that's missing, you still tap your foot there. Your foot is still always going down and up with your hand, and you always tap even if you're not strumming one of the downstrums. So now I'm going to count this along to the metronome just to show you how you would count it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 now I'm going to play this for 4 bars along with the backing track and not count. You can try to count along with me. So now I'm just going to go over some of the most popular combinations you can come up with. This is by no means all the combinations you can come up with, but these will be really useful ones for you to learn early on that you'll find in tons of songs or you'll be able to use in tons of songs, even if it's not the exact pattern in that song. So the first really popular strumming pattern is removing the second and the third down strum, and you end up with this. And then if we were to plug that into 4 bars with the E minor chord, and again, if I was to count this, I would still count the 2 and the 3, even though I'm not strumming them, because I need to always be aware of where my quarter notes land, because that's the pulse of the song. I may whisper those, or I may just count it in my head, but I need to count those so I'm always aware where they are. So here's an example of playing this with the metronome and counting. 1 and 4 and 1 and 4 and 1 and 4 and 1 and 4 and here's an example of playing this with the backing track, but I'm not going to count along this time. You can count for me. Here's another really common strumming pattern. This time we remove the first and the second up strums and the fourth down strum, and you end up with this. And here it is with the E minor chord for 4 bars. And then again, if we count this, we still count that 4, even though it's a down strum that we're skipping, but we only count the up strums that we play. So we would count 1, 2, 3, and 4 and. But that 4, we may whisper that or just count it in our head, but we still need to be aware of it where it is. But the up strums that we count are only the up strums that we play. So here's an example of counting this with the metronome. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. And now here it is with the backing track, and this time you can count for me. Or another really popular strumming pattern is to remove the first up strum and the third down strum, and we end up with this. And this is one of the most popular strumming patterns out there. You can use this in just countless songs, in countless situations. And here it is for 4 bars with the E minor chord. And again, if we count this, we always count the down strums, and you can count the ones that we're skipping quietly, but you only count the up strums that you play. So for this example, it would be 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. And again, you can whisper the 3. So 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. But you always need to be aware of where those down strums are, but you don't count the up strums that you don't play. So here it is counting for 4 bars with the metronome. 1, 2, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. And this time again, I'll play it to the backing track, but you count for me. Now, another thing about playing these patterns that I haven't mentioned yet, but is an easy way to remember how to play them, is for starting out, if you're struggling counting, you can, instead of counting, say down and up for your strums. So for example, this one, I would say down, down, up, down, up. I would still try to phrase it in the same time, but then I would only say the down and up strums, and it's easier to get the feel. So when I'm playing along, when I'm starting out, I'm pretty much training my brain to tell my hand what to do and when to strum. You need to get past that to the point where you can count along with the actual counting of the time, but that's a helpful technique you can use. So that one, like I said, is down, down, up, down, up. This one you could say down, 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 up, down, 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 up, and so on. And like I said, that's just helping your hand know where to actually hit the strings. Your hand's still moving down and up the whole time, but those are where you hit the strings. So now we can just take those popular strumming patterns that I just showed you and plug them into the chord progression. So here's the first example. Now, instead of just playing E minor for 4 bars, we're going to play the chord progression, the G, D, E minor 7, C add 9. And I'm just going to demo this to the backing track so you can hear it and you can count for me. Or here's the second one that we went over, this time again to the chord progression instead of just E minor. Here it is to the backing track. And here's the third one applied to the chord progression. And here's the fourth one applied to the chord progression. Again, this is one of the most common strumming patterns you'll come across. So this may be the first one you want to learn when you're actually up to this section where you're skipping some of the down strums. And again, I just have to reiterate this over and over. Your hand is always moving down and up. Your foot is always moving along right with your hand. And you're always tapping on the 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the quarter notes, whether you're playing or not, because that's the pulse of the song. That's where you would tap along. That's how you keep good time. And when you count, you always count all of the quarter notes, even if you play them or not, even if you're just counting it in your head. You need to be aware where those quarter notes are. And you don't count the up strums that you don't play. You only count the up strums that you play. But again, you're going to get to the point where you just count in your head and then get to the point where you don't even really have to think about counting unless you're learning a new piece that's more complicated and you need to figure it out and get it down. But you'll eventually just get to the point where you can really feel it and you're not even necessarily thinking about counting most of the time. But always just try to keep your foot tapping on those quarter notes because that's going to help you keep good time always. Those quarter notes are so important in 4/4 time. So now we're to a really fun part, and that's where you can create your own strumming patterns. What you're going to find is that you're just going to end up with strumming patterns that are already used, and the ones you like the most are probably used a lot because the reason they're used a lot is because they sound good. But this will let you know how strumming patterns are created and set you so far ahead of most people who are either beginner or even intermediate or even some advanced people, because most people don't build this foundation first and then they just get to the point of playing things by feel. But then when it comes time to count and really know where you are, really play in certain situations, even more advanced players can really struggle with that. For me personally, strumming came fairly easily for me. I was just naturally able to strum more complicated patterns, but I was horrible at actually counting and knowing exactly where I was at all times. It took me practicing that part to get good at it. So I'm going to go over the method for creating your own strumming patterns. You can just follow along and write this out on a piece of paper. So to create a strumming pattern, we're just going to take all down and up strumming, so 8th note strumming, and we're just going to remove certain strums and write it out again with those strums removed. So to do this, you would write out something like I have on the screen here, where you have a bar with all 8th note strums, so 8 strums down and up. And then you would draw an arrow pointing to another bar with just the first down strum in there. And then to create a strumming pattern, you're just going to randomly remove any of the strums except the first strum. We're going to keep the first strum in there because it's much easier and much more common. And then down the road, for more advanced stuff, you can start practicing removing the first down strum. So you can just randomly cross out any of the strums except the first one. So for example, if I cross out the first up strum and the second down strum, I would cross them out like that. And then in the bar that just has the one down strum, I would write out the strums with those two strums missing, so it would look like this. And now I've created a strumming pattern. I could just repeat this over and over again. And it's really good to write the timing out as well. So for example, with this one, you would write 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. Because we've skipped the first up strum and the second down strum. The first up strum you wouldn't count if you didn't play it, and the second down strum you would count because it's a quarter note. It's a down strum, it's a quarter note. You need to know where that is all the time, so I drew it in red. So that's how you would create a strumming pattern. Now you can plug this into the chord progression and you have a strumming pattern. But I could do that with any combination. I could cross out any of the strums besides the first one and come up with the strumming pattern. And the thing to be aware of is that the more strums in a row that you cross out, the harder it is to keep your time, because you're going to have a long period of time where you just have to keep tapping without strumming. You need to keep moving your hand like you're playing. That'll help you keep time. But if you're not playing anything for multiple strums in a row, it's a lot harder to keep your time. So just be aware of that. So you may want to start off by only crossing out 2 strums in a row instead of like 4 strums in a row, because then you're going to have a long pause where you have to really feel that time. But once you get used to it, it'll be easier and easier, and you can cross out and just leave the first one and feel it. But that would be a really boring strumming pattern. But there are times when that is the right part for the song. So like I said, just write these out on a sheet of paper, come up with your own strumming patterns, see which ones sound good to you, which ones are easy to play, which ones are hard to play. Find your favorite ones, work on those first. And you can create a whole book of strumming patterns if you want, and just try them out anytime you write a new song or apply them to different chord progressions and see what you like.